My wife divorced me by email while I was deployed and emptied our account. What she didn't know destroyed her life. The email arrived at 0347 local time while I was pulling security duty at our forward operating base in Afghanistan. Subject line, "Let's be adults about this. My name is Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, 38 years old, and until that moment, I thought I had a marriage worth fighting for. I'd been deployed for 7 months when Jessica decided our 13-year marriage was over. The message was clinical, efficient, like she was terminating a business contract rather than ending a life we'd built together. She'd already filed the paperwork. She'd already moved her boyfriend Derek into our house in Colorado Springs. She'd already emptied our joint savings account of $43,000. I read the email twice in the dim glow of my tablet, surrounded by the distant sounds of helicopters and generators. Then I closed it, finished my watch, and said nothing to anyone. Because what Jessica didn't understand was that I'd been preparing for this possibility longer than she'd been planning her betrayal. You see, military life teaches you to expect the unexpected. Equipment fails, missions change, people disappoint you, so you prepare contingencies, backup plans, fail-safes. What my wife had overlooked during her careful planning was that I'd been applying those same principles to our marriage for the past 2 years. I met Jessica in 2009 at a coffee shop near Fort Carson. She was finishing her nursing degree, working part-time at a veterinary clinic. Beautiful, smart, with this laugh that could light up a room. We were married 8 months later in a small ceremony that her parents barely attended. Military marriages, they said, never last. For the first few years, we proved them wrong. Jessica supported my career, understood the deployments, the training exercises that kept me away for weeks at a time. She'd write letters during my first deployment to Iraq, send care packages that became legendary in my unit. When I came home from Afghanistan in 2012, she was at the airport with a sign that read, "Welcome home, hero." But something started changing around 2018. Small things at first. Jessica began mentioning how her friend Sarah had divorced her military husband and was living her best life now. She started going out more, joining a gym that was surprisingly far from our house, working extra shifts that somehow never appeared on her pay stubs. I didn't confront her, didn't start checking her phone or following her around. That's not who I am. Instead, I did what any good soldier does when he senses trouble. I gathered intelligence and prepared defensive positions. I opened a separate bank account at a different institution, one that Jessica didn't know about. Nothing dramatic, just automatic transfers of $200 per month from my pay. Military housing allowance, hazard pay differentials, small amounts that wouldn't be missed from our joint account, but would add up over time. I also moved important documents to a secure location off base. Birth certificates, marriage license, my military records, the deed to our house. Jessica had always handled our paperwork, filed our taxes, managed our finances. She was good at it, efficient, trustworthy, until she wasn't. The night before my latest deployment, she drove me to the airport. The goodbye was cold, professional, like she was dropping off a package rather than sending her husband to a war zone. "Stay safe," she said, but her eyes were already looking past me toward whatever future she was planning. I should have known then, but part of me still hoped I was wrong. The signs had been building for months before I deployed. Jessica stopped asking about my return date, stopped making plans for after my deployment. Our phone calls became shorter, more infrequent. When I asked about her day, her answers were vague, rehearsed. 3 months into deployment, I noticed something odd. Our joint bank account showed unusual spending patterns, large cash withdrawals, payments to vendors I didn't recognize. When I asked Jessica about them during our weekly video call, She said she was doing some home improvements, wanted to surprise me when I got back. That's when I started monitoring our accounts more carefully. Military banking apps make it easy to track spending in real time, even from overseas. The withdrawals were increasing, both in frequency and amount. More concerning were the deposits from sources I didn't recognize. Jessica's paychecks from the veterinary clinic were consistent, but there were other deposits, irregular amounts that didn't match any pattern I could identify. I could have confronted her then, demanded explanations over scratchy video calls. Instead, I did something that Jessica, in all her careful planning, never expected. I contacted our bank and requested detailed transaction histories going back 18 months. As an account holder, I had every right to this information. As her husband, I had every reason to want it. The records revealed a story I'd been trying not to see. Cash withdrawals that coincided with her gym sessions, payments to a storage unit rental company that I'd never heard of. Most telling were the deposits, payments from someone named Derek Hamilton, amounts that suggested he'd been helping with our household expenses for months. Derek Hamilton. I ran the name through basic social media searches during my off-duty hours. Divorced, 2 kids, worked construction in Colorado Springs. His Facebook photos showed him at restaurants I recognized, places Jessica had mentioned visiting with girlfriends. In the background of several photos, I could make out a woman with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, Jessica's signature hairstyle. Still, I didn't confront her. Instead, I made a phone call to James Rodriguez, my old squad leader who'd retired, and started a private investigation business in Denver. Military connections run deep, and James owed me a favor from our time in Iraq. "Mike, you sure you want to know?" he asked after I explained the situation. "I need to know," I replied. "All of it." The report arrived 3 weeks later via encrypted email. Photos, financial records, witness statements. Jessica and Derek had been together for over a year. They'd rented the storage unit to move Derek's belongings closer to our house. The irregular deposits were Derek contributing to household expenses as he gradually moved into my home, my life, my marriage. But here's what James discovered that Jessica didn't know I knew. Derek Hamilton had a history. 2 previous relationships with military wives, both ending in similar circumstances. Deployment affairs that turned into divorce proceedings, where the wives lost everything because Derek convinced them to make financial moves that appeared suspicious to military divorce courts. This wasn't romance. This was a pattern. Derek targeted military wives, isolated them during deployments, then guided them through divorce proceedings that left them financially and legally vulnerable while he moved on to his next target. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be another mark in Derek's ongoing con game, and Jessica, despite her betrayal, didn't deserve to be his next victim. I spent the next month preparing. Every military operation requires detailed planning, and this was the most important mission of my life. I documented everything: the timeline of Derek's pattern, financial records showing his contributions to our household, evidence of his previous relationships with military wives. More importantly, I began implementing what the military calls operational security. I changed passwords on accounts Jessica didn't know about and secured my military benefits information and prepared legal documentation that would protect my interests in the coming divorce proceedings. The night before I received Jessica's email, I'd already filed preliminary paperwork with a military family law attorney. I'd already documented the unauthorized access to our joint accounts. I'd already prepared evidence of adultery that would affect property division under military divorce statutes. What Jessica thought was her carefully planned surprise was actually her walking into a trap I'd been setting for months. The morning after receiving her email, I called my commanding officer and requested emergency leave. Family crisis, I explained. Personal legal matters that required immediate attention. Military leadership understands these situations. They approved my leave within hours. But I didn't fly home to Colorado Springs. Instead, I flew to Denver and met with my attorney, James Rodriguez, and a financial investigator who specialized in military divorce cases. We spent 2 days reviewing evidence, preparing documentation, and filing legal responses that Jessica wouldn't expect for weeks. By the time I landed in Colorado Springs, the legal machinery was already in motion. Temporary restraining orders on joint accounts, preliminary asset protection filings, and most importantly, criminal fraud charges against Derek Hamilton for his pattern of targeting military families. I didn't go to our house. Instead, I checked into a hotel and waited. Jessica thought she had weeks, maybe months, to consolidate her position. She thought I'd come home angry, desperate, ready to accept whatever terms she offered to make the divorce quick and quiet. She was wrong. The first sign of trouble came when Jessica tried to access our joint savings account the next morning. Frozen. The checking account. Frozen. The credit cards. Cancelled. Every financial asset we'd shared was now under court protection, pending investigation into unauthorized transactions during my deployment. My phone started ringing within hours. Jessica, confused and angry. "Michael, what did you do? I can't access any of our accounts." "I protected our assets pending legal review," I replied calmly. "Standard procedure when adultery affects military benefits." Silence. Then, "How did you? We need to talk." "We can talk through our attorneys," I said, and hung up. That afternoon, Derek Hamilton was arrested at his construction job. Fraud charges related to his pattern of financial manipulation involving military families. Turns out, the financial investigator had uncovered evidence of Derek's schemes going back 5 years, affecting 8 different military families across 3 states. Jessica called again that evening, her voice shaking. "Michael, I don't understand what's happening. Derek's been arrested. They're saying things about fraud and targeting military wives. This is some kind of mistake." "Is it?" I asked quietly. "You have to help me fix this. We can work this out, go to counseling, figure things out together." "Jessica, you sent me divorce papers while I was in a combat zone. You emptied our accounts while I was serving our country. You moved another man into our home while I was defending yours." I paused, letting the weight of her actions sink in. There's nothing to fix. What Jessica discovered over the following weeks painted a picture she'd never imagined. Derek's previous relationships followed an identical pattern. Target military wives during deployments, convince them to leave their husbands, manipulate them into financial decisions that would benefit him, then disappear when the divorce settlements were finalized. His first victim, Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, lost her house, her savings, and custody of her children because Derek convinced her to make financial moves that appeared to be hiding assets from her husband. She was still fighting legal battles 3 years later. His second victim, Corporal Jennifer Walsh, ended up bankrupt after Derek convinced her to co-sign loans for his business ventures, then disappeared when his construction company failed, leaving her responsible for hundreds of thousands in debt. Jessica was meant to be victim number 3. The investigation revealed that Derek had been planning this con for months before he approached Jessica. He'd researched military deployment schedules, identified vulnerable spouses, and systematically targeted women whose husbands were overseas for extended periods. He'd convinced Jessica to start moving money into accounts he could access, told her they needed to hide assets before filing for divorce, assured her that military divorce law favored spouses who showed financial independence. Every piece of advice he'd given her was designed to make her look guilty of financial fraud while protecting his ability to access her resources. 3 weeks after my return, Jessica sat across from me in a coffee shop near our house, looking older than her 35 years. Derek was in jail awaiting trial. The house was in foreclosure because Jessica couldn't make payments without access to our joint accounts. Her job at the veterinary clinic was in jeopardy because her legal troubles were affecting her ability to focus on work. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "About Derek, about his history. I thought I was in love." "What did you think would happen?" I asked. "Did you think I'd just accept the divorce and walk away?" She stared at her coffee cup. "I thought you'd be angry. I thought you'd want it over quickly to avoid embarrassment." "Embarrassment?" I leaned forward. "Jessica, I spent 13 years of my life with you. I deployed 6 times, missed birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, believing I was protecting something worth protecting. You threw that away for a con artist who targeted military families for profit." Tears started running down her cheeks. I know I destroyed everything. But Michael, what happens now? I can't afford a lawyer. I might lose my job. The house." I sat back, studying this woman I'd once loved more than anything in the world. "Now you face the consequences of your choices." The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Because of the adultery and financial fraud, military divorce law heavily favored my position. I kept the house, the majority of our assets, and my full military benefits. Jessica received a minimal settlement and agreed to pay restitution for the money she'd moved to accounts I couldn't access. Derek Hamilton was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for fraud targeting military families. His scheme had cost 8 families over $2.2 million in losses, destroyed multiple marriages, and left several children in custody battles. Jessica's testimony helped convict him, though it didn't repair the damage to her own life. But the real revelation came during Derek's trial. FBI investigators had uncovered the full scope of his operation. He had a network of accomplices who helped identify targets, a sophisticated social media presence designed to appeal to lonely military spouses, and detailed files on deployment schedules for multiple military bases. Jessica wasn't just a victim of romance fraud. She was a victim of a coordinated criminal enterprise that treated military families like ATMs to be emptied during deployments. 6 months after the divorce, I received a letter from Jessica. She had moved back to her hometown in Ohio, was working at a small animal clinic, living with her parents while she rebuilt her credit and her life. The letter was an apology, an explanation, and a warning. "I want other military wives to know," she wrote. "Derek's not the only one doing this. There are men specifically targeting us while our husbands are deployed. They know we're vulnerable, lonely, dealing with stress that civilian marriages never face. They study us, Michael. They know exactly what to say, how to make us feel special, understood, appreciated." She was right. The FBI investigation had revealed an entire subculture of predators who specialized in targeting military families. Dating apps were monitored for women who listed military bases as their location. Social media groups for military spouses were infiltrated by men looking for marks. Support groups for dealing with deployment stress became hunting grounds for emotional manipulation. I forwarded Jessica's letter to the base family readiness group, with her permission. It became part of a briefing that was shared across multiple military installations. Her story helped other families recognize the warning signs, protect themselves from similar schemes. A year later, I was promoted to Sergeant First Class and assigned to a training position at Fort Benning. No more deployments, no more months away from home. I'd learned something about trust, about preparation, about the difference between paranoia and prudent caution. I also learned something about justice, not revenge but consequences. Derek Hamilton destroyed multiple families for profit, and he was held accountable. Jessica made choices that destroyed our marriage, and she faced the legal and financial consequences of those choices. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that sometimes the best way to protect yourself from betrayal isn't to avoid trusting people entirely. It's to trust but verify, to hope for the best while preparing for disappointment. 2 years after the divorce, I met Sarah at a bookstore in Columbus, Georgia. She was a teacher, divorced, with 2 kids, and a smile that reminded me why I'd believed in love in the first place. We took things slowly, very slowly, but when I eventually told her about Jessica and Derek, she understood why I needed time to trust again. "You're not paranoid," she said one evening as we sat on her porch watching her kids play in the yard. "You're experienced. There's a difference." Today, Sarah and I are engaged. We have separate accounts and joint accounts, individual goals and shared dreams. Most importantly, we have honest communication about fears, expectations, and the kind of preparation that makes a relationship stronger rather than building walls between partners. I never heard from Jessica again after that letter, but I heard about Derek Hamilton one more time. He was released from federal prison after serving 2.5 years. Within 6 months, he was arrested again for a similar scheme, this time targeting divorced mothers in military towns. Some people never learn, but some do. The briefing materials that included Jessica's story helped prevent dozens of similar schemes from succeeding. Military families became more aware, more prepared, better able to recognize and resist the tactics used by predators who target military communities. In the end, Jessica's betrayal taught me something valuable about preparation, about the difference between healthy caution and destructive paranoia. It taught me that love requires trust, but trust doesn't require naivety. Sometimes the person you're married to isn't the person you think you know. Sometimes the life you've built can be dismantled by someone who sees your dedication as weakness, your deployment as opportunity, your service as something to be exploited rather than respected. But sometimes, if you're prepared, if you're careful, if you understand that hoping for the best doesn't mean failing to plan for the worst, you can protect yourself and others from those who would take advantage of the sacrifices military families make every day. Derek Hamilton thought he'd found another easy mark in a deployed soldier's wife. What he found instead was someone who'd been trained to expect the unexpected, to plan for contingencies, and to protect what matters most. Jessica thought she'd found love and financial security with someone who understood her better than her military husband ever could. What she found instead were federal fraud charges and the destruction of everything she'd spent 13 years building. They both learned the same lesson. Underestimating military families is a mistake that carries serious consequences. As for me, I learned that the same skills that make you a good soldier, preparation, vigilance, strategic thinking, and the ability to execute complex plans under pressure, can also make you someone who doesn't stay a victim when life decides to test your resilience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply being better prepared than the people who underestimate you.